Tonight, we're joining up with thousands of other university students all around. Q Commons happens in Europe, Africa, Australia, and the idea is to stimulate our thinking and help us consider what it means for Christians to advance the common good in our community. So tonight, we're leaning into that topic, healing our divided nation. It's so timely, you guys. It's really, I'm so bummed out about the way people talk to each other these days, and I'm really looking forward to some healing and leadership in the future. So let me tell you how the evening's going to work. In just a moment, we go to the national broadcast. It's hosted by Q founder Gabe Lyons. The first portion of the broadcast features a national Q talk from our first presenter, and that's David Brooks. He's going to kind of set the table for the whole tone this evening. And then we have, here at OC, intentionally selected 3 student leaders that we really think have something to say. And you guys, they've worked really, really hard with Q and with me. It's really going back to the summer and the very beginning of the school year. So they really have something to say tonight. And I can't wait to hear Tanner and Madeline and Racquelle talk to you tonight. So following that, so we'll have like a national talk. Then we'll have Madeline, we'll have Tanner, and I'll introduce them as we go. And then we're going to take like 15 minutes to chat about what we learned. Then we'll have 2 more national talks, and Racquelle will close up our evening. So, wow, a lot to do, and we're doing it all in 2 hours. So we're going to try and stay on schedule. So, thanks for coming tonight. And now we're going to hook it up and listen to Gabe Lyons, who founded Q.
Welcome to Q Union. I'm Gabe Lyons, the founder and president of Q, and we are so thrilled that you've come together tonight for such an important, unique, and interesting conversation. You're going to get to hear from your peers, and you're also going to hear our talks that are happening here tonight, broadcast and streamed to you. And it's just going to be a great night where you're going to get equipped, you're going to be challenged, I think you're going to be inspired, I think you're going to probably laugh a little bit, and you're going to have some incredible conversations. What's exciting about tonight, too, is this is happening on multiple college campuses across the U.S., from Ivy League schools like Cornell, to state schools like Virginia Tech, to Christian universities like Wheaton, Biola, Liberty. There's students gathering by the hundreds in many places to come together and think well about how do we as Christians faithfully engage society. How can we be aware of the challenges that sit in front of us? How can we not only be educated, but then be informed enough to know what we can do next? And so when we conclude tonight, we'll actually give you an action plan. We'll help you know what it might look like for each of us as individuals to be a part of the solution. Now, a couple things to know about Q, especially for those of you, this is your first time, you're probably still wondering, what does the Q stand for? Well, Q stands for questions. When we began Q, we said, let's create space where we didn't just try to give all the answers, but where we committed to say, let's ask better questions. Let's learn from one another. Let's not just assume that we have it all figured out. Let's try to be informed, but then let's engage with one another. And so part of the evening will be you getting to actually talk to your peers, having a moment to reflect on some of the things you've heard, maybe some things you disagreed with. And that's the other thing, humility. We believe that this is critical to learning, that we actually have to step into places like this, recognizing we're going to hear some things that we absolutely disagree with. Or we think we heard a speaker say something, we go, that's wrong. Or there's going to be times where you're celebrating, and you're wanting to cheer them on, and you're like, yes, finally somebody said that. And that's okay. You can be vocal. You can share what you're feeling and express that. But the idea is to have a civil place, though, where these kinds of conversations can take place. You know, in America today, we feel the divide, and sometimes as Christians, it's harder to know how to engage. And I know in our audience, we have several Christians. We also have people who are here tonight who aren't Christians, or they're still questioning whether this Christian thing or the Christian faith is really that important, or does it have anything to say to public life? Well, we believe it does, and we believe historically the Christian faith grounds us to understand how human beings can flourish the most. And it's when we come together to learn about that we start to exchange these ideas. We learn from history. We look forward and say, what are the pressing challenges of the future? And together we start to live into that. And so tonight, you're going to hear multiple talks. We have one 18-minute talk that's about to begin. I'm going to introduce our first presenter, David Brooks, in just a moment. But then following that, you're going to have 9-minute talks taking place by your peers. And you'll hear more about each of them and why they were selected, what they're going to talk about. But they have talks that they've specifically prepared for you and for your campus to think about the current culture that we're living in and how those issues might be affecting you and your relationships. And so that's usually the most fun part of the night because you get to hear from people you walk by on campus every day. And so we're excited for that portion to begin. And then as the night goes on, you're going to see a clock that counts down those talks. We really want to respect your time. And so everybody's worked hard to keep their talks within these 18-minute and then 9-minute parameters. But all in all, we are going to have a great night. And so I'm excited to introduce to you our first presenter. He's someone who has quite a reputation for thinking through how do we as human beings get along better. He's somebody who's written many books. He's been at the New York Times for many, many years, writing a column that comes out every Tuesday and Friday. He also has written several best-selling books, one being The Social Animal, and his latest, The Road to Character. And as you'll see from meeting David here in these next few moments and hearing some of his thoughts, what I love about him is it's not just that he's a thought leader, somebody who's thinking about where culture's going, where society's going, and how we can be a part of it, but he deeply understands human nature. You know, he doesn't just give us a pass as humans that we're just like the animals, that we don't actually have souls or a morality, that there's something more to what it means to be a human being and how we interact with one another and the importance of that in seeing our society flourish. And so you're going to hear not only some interesting information and learn some things, but I think you're going to see and sense in his own heart and soul somebody who believes we can do better and believes that part of doing better is that we be very engaged in this idea of cultivating virtue. And so I want you to join me in welcoming, and that's right, even in your own locations, I want you to put your hands together and welcome to the stage David Brooks.
Thank you, Gabe. Now, about 10 years ago, I was driving home from work, and my driveway in those days pulled into the house and then around in the backyard. And so I pulled to the side, the backyard, and you could see back on the lawn. And my kids, who were then like 12, 9, and 4, had one of those supermarket plastic balls. And they were kicking it up in the air, and then they were running across the yard to see who could get there first. And they were laughing and tumbling all over each other and giggling. And so I come home from work, and I look through the windshield, and I'm just presented with this tableau of perfect family happiness. And I'm sure every parent has seen it. Sometimes you just look out over your kids, and you just seem so great. I remember that night, the summer sun was coming through the trees. For some reason, my lawn looked perfect. And I just sat there looking at the kids, and reality seemed to spill outside its boundaries, and I just was overwhelmed with a feeling of gratitude for a kind of joy that I couldn't have earned. And when you get those kind of moments, one of the things you want to do is you want to try to earn those moments. You want to try to be worthy of those moments of grace. And so I started thinking, you know, I've achieved way more career success than I ever thought I would, but that kind of joy I certainly don't deserve. And occasionally, like once a month, I meet somebody and they just radiate an inner light. They have a tranquility and peace that just, I think, you know, I've done okay in the world, but what they have, I don't have that. How do you get that? And so I started writing books on how you get that. And one of the things I did was I found a bunch of people through history who at age 20 were kind of pathetic, but by age 70 were kind of amazing. And so I wanted to know, how'd they do that? How do you cultivate virtue, be a better person? And the basic strategy that I came up with in that book was a lot of the people I looked at, they identified their core sin. They said, what's the thing that's weak about me? And then they spent their lives trying to beat back that core sin. And one of the characters in the book was Dwight Eisenhower. And when Ike was 9, he wanted to go trick-or-treating, but his mom, named Ida, wouldn't let him. And he threw a temper tantrum, and he was so mad, he started punching a tree, and he rubbed all the skin off his fingers. And Ida sent him up to his room, had him cry for an hour, and then came up to bind his wounds. And while she was doing so, she recited a verse from Proverbs, that he that conquereth his own soul is greater than he who taketh a city. And when he wrote his memoirs 60 years later, Ike said that was the most important conversation of his life, because it taught him that he had a problem. And his problem was his temper. And if he was going to amount to anything in the world, it was going to have to beat the temper. And he spent the rest of his life trying to be a less angry person, a less hate-filled person. And so one of the things he did was he would take out all the people he hated in the middle of the night, and he'd write them down on pieces of paper, and he'd rip up the papers to show how much he was purging his anger. And so the great virtue, as I saw it, was humility. Humility is not thinking lowly of yourself. It's not even not thinking about yourself. It's radical self-awareness from a position of other-centeredness. It's the ability to step outside yourself and look at yourself and say, what is my strength and what is my weakness? And the great sin in my book that we as a society often suffer from is narcissism and pride, the inability to know where you're really broken. And therefore, you don't have the honesty to actually deal with what you're broken with. And so that was the basic formula. The people I really admired, for them, the internal drama against their own weakness was the central drama of their lives, not something that was going on outside in society, and not their worldly climb up to success. And so I wrote the book, and I came out with the book, and you go around, you talk about it. And after the book came out, I noticed one thing about my characters that I didn't realize beforehand. And that was that they had amazing moms. Their dads were but their moms were amazing. And then I came across a study that was done for a bunch of guys who served in World War II. Millions of men got drafted in the Army in World War II, and some of them rose and become colonels and majors, and some of them stayed privates. And they wanted to know what correlated with success in World War II. And they did this study, and it wasn't IQ. Socioeconomic status didn't really seem to matter. Wasn't even physical courage for these soldiers. The thing that mattered to the guys who had big success in the Army in World War II, the number one correlation was relationship with mother. The guys who had a mom who poured forth a vast flood of love and joy into them, they had the capacity to pour it into themselves, into their men, and they became good officers. And so I was thinking along those lines about the characters I'd written about. And one of the things I realized was they had these great moms, but they also had the ability to embed themselves, to plant themselves. We put a lot of emphasis on our culture and being free and moving around, but they had the amazing ability to plant themselves down. And so one of my characters was a great woman named Dorothy Day. And Dorothy Day was the sort of young woman, she lived about 100 years ago, and when she read novels, she didn't just read the novels. She became like the character she was reading about. And unfortunately, she read a lot of Dostoevsky. So she was drinking a lot, she was carousing about, hanging around with lowlifes, 2 suicide attempts, 2 abortions. And her life was basically a fragmented mess. Her moment of change, her moment of agency came when she gave birth to her daughter. She was about 30, single mom. And she wrote an account of what it's like to give birth. And at the end of her essay, she wrote this paragraph: if I had sculpted the greatest sculpture, composed the greatest symphony, or written the greatest novel, I could not have felt the more exalted creator than I did when they placed my child in my arms. With the birth of my daughter came a vast flood of love and joy, and I felt within myself the need to worship and to adore. And with that moment, she said, who do I thank for all this gratitude? And at that moment, she found God. Over the next couple of years, she became a Catholic. She started a newspaper called The Catholic Worker, a radical newspaper in New York. And then she spent the next 60 years not only serving the poor, but living with the poor. A life of poverty, serving upward to the homeless, to the needy, and often to the mentally unstable. And so she had a great ability to plant herself, to commit herself. And so I came to realize that the thing my characters had, the things that transferred them from being kind of pathetic to kind of amazing, was the ability to make commitments. And I came to think about it, I think a lot of us in our lives, we make 4 big commitments. We make a commitment to a spouse and a family, to a vocation, to our job, to a philosophy or faith, and to our communities and friends. And when you think about it, the fulfillment of our lives depends on how well we choose the things to commit to and then execute upon those commitments. And I came to think that in the book, I had thought that cultivating virtue was all within, but I came to think it's without. It's how we relate to others and whether we're solidly committed. And so one of the things that commitment does is it gives you your sense of identity. If I introduce myself to you at a party, I'm going to really start talking about what I'm committed to, and you're going to do the same. That's your sense of identity. It gives you your sense of purpose and meaning. In 2007, the Gallup organization did a survey all around the world, and they asked people all around the world, do you have a sense of purpose and meaning in your life? And the country where the most people said, yeah, I have a sense of purpose in my life, the number one country in the world, it was Liberia. And it was not because everything was going great in Liberia. They were in the middle of a war. But in order to survive, they had to commit ferociously to each other. And the country where the least number of people said they had a sense of purpose and meaning in their life was the Netherlands, which is actually a pretty great and pleasant country to be in. And so that sense of commitment gave people a sense of existential urgency. I'm in it with you. And the third thing a commitment does is it gives you a sense of sanctification. It pulls you out of yourself. So sometimes you start on a commitment just because it's casual, it's easy to do. I'm a writer. When I was 7, I read a book called Paddington the Bear, and I knew at that moment I wanted a writer. My joke is that in high school I wanted to date this woman named Bernice, and she didn't want to date me, she wanted to date some other guy, and I remember thinking, what is she thinking? I write way better than that guy. But so I've always been a writer. And you do it for a job, you do it to get some recognition, make some money. But one of the things I do when I write, I have a carpet, like the one I'm standing on. And I have a terrible memory, so I write everything out in papers. And when I'm writing, I lay the papers out on the floor of my rug, and each pile of papers is a paragraph on whatever I'm writing. So my columns in the newspaper are only 850 words, but I have like 14 piles. And so for me, the process of writing is not typing into the keyboard. The process of me is crawling around on the carpet and laying out my piles. And I get inspired at those moments, and sometimes that's the best part about my job. And sometimes it's almost like prayer because things are just happening to me. And so in that way, my commitment to writing, it helps you lift you out of yourself to things you didn't know you were capable of. Those of us who are parents, when you have a kid, you sort of don't really know what's happening. But as the kid matures, as the kid demands, as the kid arouses your love, then it makes you a better person. You think of falling in love, you start dating someone. You may date them because you want somebody to go to the movies with. You may date them because you're physically aroused by them. But the act of falling in love pulls out of you more than you thought you had. There's a great novel named Captain Corelli's Mandolin by a guy named Louis de Bernier. And in the first third of the novel, there's an old guy talking to his daughter about his love for his late wife who had died. And he says this. He says, love itself is what is left over when being in love has burned away. And this is both an art and a fortunate accident. Your mother and I had it. We had roots that grew toward each other underground, and when all the pretty blossoms had fallen from our branches, we discovered we were one tree and not two. So think about that. They fall in love, they're young, but then over the course of their lives, really their loves get sanctified because of the demands of marriage, the demands of staying in the commitment. It pulls you out of yourself and makes you better than you were. Now, I happen to think we live in a society that makes it really hard to do commitments. We live in a society that emphasizes freedom, being yourself, being on your own. And what I find, especially people, especially in their 20s, but often through life, they suffer from what I call a telos crisis. They're sort of loosely attached to everything. They don't really know why they're doing what they're doing. They're in a job, they're okay with it. They're in a relationship, they're okay with it. They're living in a community, but they're kind of arm's length from it. They're not really deeply committed to those things. And when things go bad, and you don't have deep and meshing commitments, then things really go bad. Nietzsche has a saying, he who has a why to live for can endure anyhow. He who has a why to live for can endure anyhow. If you know why you're doing it, when the setback comes, then you can handle it. But if you don't know why you're doing it, then you're really in trouble. And I think we have a lot of people who are not enmeshed in commitments, who are just sort of loosely connected, and they are really in trouble. And I don't blame them for it a bit. We as a society give them no help. One of the things I read just as a matter of interest is commencement speeches. We've all seen in the commencement speeches. They get some highly successful person to give the commencement in which they're supposed to say that career success doesn't really matter. But what they do in a commencement is they give young people the advice that's typical of our society, but B, it tends to be really crappy advice. People are coming out of college or high school, and they don't know what to do with themselves. And so what does the commencement speaker says? Be free, be autonomous, be on your own. And they're like, yeah, freedom is the problem. I want to know what to do with my life. Don't just tell me I'm free. And I want to know, where do I go to look for answers? And then we give them this answer, well, you do you. The answers are in yourself. Look to yourself. Follow your passion. They don't have a passion. But we think, oh, it's all inside. And then they say, well, I want to tie myself down. What can I really believe in? And they say, oh, the future is limitless. Do whatever you want. In other words, young people come to society saying, what can I commit to? What can I tie myself down to? What can I dedicate myself with? And we don't even have a language to tell them what to do. We tell them, it's all on you. It's all on your own. And so what I've concluded that you have to do is sort of rebel against society a little. There's been a society that's about freedom. You have to rebel a little against it. If the world says to you, celebrate your independence, you say, no, I'm going to celebrate my dependence. You've got to have a different mindset. If the world says to you, celebrate your autonomy, you say, no, I'm going to celebrate relationship. If the world says to you, no, you've always got to act in the active voice, never in the passive voice, you say, no, I'm going to operate in the middle voice, the voice that is about conversing, about listening and receiving. I'm going to be in relationship and not always imposing myself on the world. If the world says to you that society is a contract where we do everything for our self-interest, you say, no, society is a covenant where you and I join together to create a third thing. You don't create a covenant because of your self-interest. You create a covenant to change your identity, to become a different sort of person. If the world says march to the beat of your own drummer, you say, no, I'm part of a collective and I'm marching to the beat of the drummer that is covenantal and within all of us. And so to me, we have to become more communal in a society that's become more individualistic. We have to become more emotional in a society that's become too cognitive. And we have to become more moral in a society that's too utilitarian. One of the heroes in my book is a guy who also had a great name, a mom named Augustine. And Augustine lived like 1600 years ago in North Africa. And he had a mom named Monica who was the helicopter mom to beat all helicopter moms. And so she was telling him like who he could befriend, who he could not befriend, what he could believe, what he couldn't believe, who he could marry, who he couldn't marry. She was all over the guy. And he needed to break free. So he thought, I need to become free and become successful. And so he tricked her. He told her he was going to go watch a friend sail on a boat from Africa, North Africa to Italy. And instead, Augustine snuck on the boat to try to sneak away. And Monica was there on the shore screaming at him. And she wasn't going to be deterred, so she got on the next boat and she tracked him down in Africa. And so they had a contentious relationship with Augustine always trying to break free. Not only free from her, but free from her Christian faith and free from everybody else. And for a while, it seemed to work for him. He got into a great college, and he became a very successful rhetorician, which is sort of like being a lawyer. And he was rising up in the social sphere. And yet, the higher he got, the more unhappy he realized he was. And he's typical of something I think happens to a lot of us. When we're young, we think we're climbing one mountain, that we think, oh, that's our mountain, career success, identity, ego, fame. That's my mountain. And then something happens in life, and we either get knocked off the mountain, or we achieve the mountain and it's not satisfying, or we suffer the death of a spouse or something terrible, and we're cast in the valley. And in the valley, we realize, that mountain was not my actual mountain. I've got a second mountain, and it's a bigger mountain, and it's a spiritual mountain. And that was really the mountain I was meant to climb all along. And Augustine realized that, and he became a Christian. He became a good person. really for the first time. And his mom said to him, you know, all my life I've wanted you to be a certain sort of person. That's why I've been hounding you. And you've become that. And so my work here is done. I'm ready to go. And they had a final conversation that Augustine describes in his book called Confessions. And there's a long sentence in there, and he repeats one word. And that word is hushed. He said the sound of the birds was hushed. The sound of the air was hushed. Our voices were hushed. And he repeats it, hushed, hushed, hushed. And I think that's the tranquility and peace and shalom that God wants us to have when we're truly committed. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David. What an amazing way for us to start our time together, to hear a talk that just helps grounds us, helps center us, helps us recognize kind of our meager place in this world, one of humility, one that looks to others and how we participate in this world, not just what this world's about for us. And I hope it impacted you. I hope it's making you think. You know, David wrote a great book called Road to Character, and in that book he talks about two types of virtues specifically. One is your eulogy virtues. What is a eulogy virtue? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? What are those things that you're cultivating in your life, the commitments that he described? Are you making those? Are you going to make those? And will people remember that about you? But the second competing idea today that I know you're dealing with, because specifically in college, this gets a lot of attention, and that is resume virtues. What are those virtues that sometimes we superficially put on, and they're meant to make us look successful, and we think that success in life is all about the accolades and everything that we're participating in, and sometimes forget about the other people in our lives and the commitments that we need to make. And so I hope you'll take away from that conversation, that talk, some things that you can apply personally at your age that are going to help you create the right kind of priorities and expectations in your own life for the years ahead. Well, now I'm excited to send it back to you. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the favorite parts of the night. When you get to start to hear from your peers, you're going to get to hear 2 talks from your peers, and then you'll join back up with us for a couple of more talks here, and we're excited about that, and I hope you enjoy these next couple of talks as well as the conversations you're going to get to have with one another. So I send it back to your host now.
Right. So, man, I wish I had hair like that. I just want to imagine just for a minute sweeping it back. It feels so good. Man, so wow. Was it just me? I don't think so. That was so rich. Viewing yourself from a position of other-centeredness. I hope you're taking notes because, you know, we're going to talk about all this. There's so much stuff happening that it's going to be easy to kind of forget some of it. So be ready to take notes. And there's just so much that I'm already thinking about. The ability to make commitments, how important that is, to have the middle voice. I'm glad to hear a name put on that. Like, instead of trying to pick one extreme or another and say, if I have that middle voice where I could kind of like connect this and that, I love that. And so, honestly, I think the next person that we're going to hear from, she's got a great middle voice. Madeline Rosique. And Madeline is a senior from Iowa. And she's had a soccer game tonight. And so we told her to just come in her soccer gear because we love her no matter what. So I'm really glad that she's going to talk to you. I was trying to think, like, what would I say about Madeline? Madeline's one of those people that no matter how long you've been friends with her, you feel like you've been friends with her forever. Like, you feel like you have, like, this special inside jokes with her and that maybe secretly you're her best friend. And we all probably think that. And she's relentlessly positive. She's always inspiring to me. She's got a really strong Twitter game. Your tweets are always just on point, so I appreciate that about you as well. And I would just say to you, I just want you to hear what she's going to talk about. Her talk title is called Take Two. Let's just say not everything has gone according to plan for Madeline Rosique in her 4 years at OC, but she has stuck with it. And I was thinking about whenever David was saying that when you make a commitment to something and you're always committed to excellence, that you get lifted out of yourself and you find that you have more inside of you than you could have ever imagined. And that's Madeline, you guys. So let's give it up for her.
A woman at Las Vegas shooting loses California home to wildfires. Tropical storm Nate kills at least 22 as the storm moves towards the U.S. Caught in a deadly ambush, U.S. troops in Niger wait for an hour for French air power to arrive. Florida coach Jim McElwain says his and other coaches' families have received death threats. Recently, we've seen multiple national and world events that lead us questioning what we can do. From political disagreement to threatened and prolonged war and horrific terrorist attacks, we all want a way to solve the world's problems, to have one great epiphany and then suddenly all of our questions are answered, to eliminate all worldly division and to bring peace. Looking at solving the division within our nation alone can be overwhelming. It causes too much anxiety and uncertainty regarding where to start. When we hear tragic stories on the news or in social media, we ask why. We try to solve the issues on a larger scale. It seems hopeless because you assume you're just one person. But maybe that's the point. You are just one person. You're one human being connected to a group of human beings who is also connected to a group of human beings. So my experience, my junior year, I allowed everything I thought was a failure in my life to eat away at me from the inside. I thought that if I didn't have a visible direction for my life, that suddenly I was doing something wrong. This created such a disconnect within myself. I was trying to display myself as doing really well, but extremely disjointed inside. My experience with school specifically was difficult. I had the false idea that I needed to graduate, go to grad school, start a career, and have it all figured out. But my life was tearing me apart from the inside out. In psychology, we call it cognitive dissonance. Basically, cognitive dissonance means that your thoughts don't match up with your actions. This disconnect started seeping its way into how I treated others, my family and friends especially. I felt messed up, but I felt like I needed to appear to everybody else like I had it together. So one day I was talking with my mom. I was probably crying way too much and making absolutely no sense. But she calmed me down and she said, "Madeline, you realize you don't have to go to grad school. You could work a minimum wage job and still be happy." This simple sentence changed my way of thinking. It was the moment I began allowing myself some grace. I had absolutely no plan for my future, but I had more trust in God. I felt free through self-grace. I didn't need to stretch myself thin and create internal disunity simply to fit the mold I expected for myself and that I assumed society expected for me. So many times we find ourselves being less than ideal or not meeting the standards that society provides for us. We desire to achieve, to plan, and to elevate our status, and if we don't get these things, then chaos. Nobody wants to feel anxious, and there's always the desire we have in our lives to have our life perfectly packaged with a bow on top and just all put together. But instead, we stress over the mistakes that we make and the failures that go on, and we fret over a future plan that falls through. Questioning elements of our lives is scary because questioning means that we lack control in some area. We're affected by outward influences and sometimes internal turmoil. Allowing yourself grace during the difficulties, being forgiving amidst the mistakes, and granting yourself kindness among the uncertainty leaves room for God's peace to reside within you. And when we're consumed by God's peace, then we aren't searching for the answers anymore. We're allowing those answers to find us. This peace grants the opportunity for unity among our hearts, our minds, and ultimately with our God. Until we each find peace within ourselves, it will manifest itself in our social relationships, both individually and in group interactions. There's dissatisfaction in self, which leads to impatience and displaced aggression with others. This is not the only component of unity, though. We desire to be accepted and associated with a like-minded group of people that we can identify with and fit in with. This leads to the undesired competition between societal groups. We want to belong somewhere. But as political scientists Chantal Liangar and Sean J. Westwood stated, out-group animosity is more consequential than favoritism for the in-group. Basically, this means that we want to fight those who think different than us in order to fit in with the people who are like us. Alan Jacobs in the Wall Street Journal stated it plainly and painfully. He said, "How do I know that you're one of us?" Oh yeah, it's because you hate the right people. We compete among one another for social acceptance. Though competition in itself isn't bad, it can invade our lives, causing division among groups of people. We choose to identify another person's core belief, or who they are, simply because they have some belief that we think that they hold, or one that they don't hold. We allowed society to break apart the unity that Christ created in friendship. We assume that we already understand people's intentions because we already know their outward beliefs. And this unintentional division is rooted in a desire to be accepted, which is not bad, until acceptance grows its foundation in self-doubt and disunity. But, as I said earlier, Christ designed these relationships to be good. He intended for them to be good. So what if on this campus, we can start spending our time listening to understand and not to respond, commending and not condemning, claiming our own shortcomings instead of proclaiming the shortcomings of others, listening instead of speaking, and understanding and not reprimanding. A great meme once said, "The first thing you should know about me is that I'm not you, and a lot more will make sense after that." Appreciating others for who they are and celebrating them every day, whether they're succeeding or they're failing. We're all trying to figure out life here. Let's start creating daily unity between one another with the understanding that God loves them, God created them, and God's working in them right now. I don't believe that there's a simple fix, one speech and suddenly every human act is altered and everyone's united, and we all know that would be great. But maybe the key to unification is taking a second look. Taking a second look at how we view ourselves and allowing mistakes to grow us by learning from them instead of degrading ourselves because of them. Searching for internal peace that only God can give and creating unity among what you do, who you are, and who God created you to be. Maybe the key to unifying this world is taking a second look at how we choose to interact with those around us. Trying to give grace during the confusion of life. What if our interactions with others were more than just my group versus your group? What if our interactions chose to see each other as unique masterpieces designed by God? Uniting over our similarities and choosing to stay united despite of our differences. Then maybe we can take a second look at how we approach the disunity of this world. It takes away the overwhelming view of conquering this world. It means we don't give up before even trying because you're just one person. It means staring chaos straight in the face and choosing to interact with it with grace. Maybe it's time to stop searching for answers to why things happen and focus on how we approach the things that happen in today's world. When we choose to interact with those around us with grace, it also eliminates our own personal chaos. Unification doesn't come by conquering the world first. It comes from building unity within yourself and intentionally connecting with others. Everyone's trying to figure out what pieces in their life are missing and how to handle life. So give yourself grace and encourage others in their experimentation of life. And one interaction at a time, begin to unite this divided nation. As Wynton Marsalis once said, there are forces all around you who wish to exploit division, rob you of your freedom, and tell you what to think. But young folks can rekindle the weary spirit of a slumbering nation. Thank you.
Wow. Right? That's so good. Thank you, Madeline. Man. All right, so let's keep going here. It's like I said, it's rapid fire. So our next speaker, Tanner Robbins. The psychology department is well represented tonight, you guys. Senior psychology major from Fort Smith, Arkansas. I met Tanner at church when he was a freshman on a mission trip for spring break, and I had the honor of him asking me to be his mentor his sophomore year, so 3 years into it now. You guys, we've met faithfully, weekly for 3 years, and I can tell you, after 3 years of weekly meetings with Tanner, I'm about 99% sure he's mentoring me. So it's just been a real blessing for me. He's thoughtful. I mean, really thoughtful. I don't see him ever speak a word out of sort. The words come out of his mouth. He puts some thought into it, and he's going to have something for you tonight. He's also witty and clever. I don't know if there's a word for opposite of hypocrite, but if there is, it's this guy. He lives what he believes, and he may be the kindest young man I've ever been around. And so I can't think of anyone better to talk to us now than Tanner Robbins.
Well, good evening. I'm very blessed to be with you all tonight. Let me tell you the story of my experiences with the sick and the suffering. Let me tell you the story of a Catholic nun who didn't even make it through her mid-20s. And let me tell you how these might just change your life. The summer of 2016 was a whirlwind of new experiences for me. Thrust into a new city and a new job I really knew nothing about until I showed up 8 hours away in Austin, Texas, really not knowing what I'm going to do. But the job was with a hospital chaplaincy group, and I spent that summer learning how to care for people emotionally and spiritually when they're at their worst. I learned more about caring for people that summer than I have in any other individual period in my life. The most important part of caring for people's emotional and spiritual needs is meeting them where they are. This is a crucial piece in any chaplaincy relationship. If the person being cared for is moving towards a topic of discussion that makes you as a chaplain uncomfortable, then you must push through that discomfort and be with them in their emotions. If you cannot do this as a chaplain, you will be ineffective. Another vitally important part of pastoral care is the ability to be a non-anxious presence. A chaplain can be in the midst of a situation of the utmost angst, and rather than contributing to the anxiety, the chaplain must actually expel anxiety by being a beacon of tranquility in a sea of unrest. To do these things well, the chaplain must be hyper-conscious and able to notice intricate and often latent details within the actions, words, and feelings of the one in need. It's here that I want to introduce a simple guide that I'll develop a bit more later. See, hear, value. To illustrate this idea, I'll tell you the story of a man I had the pleasure of seeing throughout that summer. Let's call him Warren. Warren was a rough-around-the-edges Texas gentleman in his late 50s who had been in a horrific car accident. Warren was in a neurological rehab facility throughout the summer that I worked in Austin. As I visited Warren a couple times a week throughout the summer, it was essential for me to pick up on cues that would help me negotiate his great neurological deficiencies surrounding his lack of emotional regulation, logical reasoning, and his physical disabilities involving his coming and going ability to talk on his own or to even breathe on his own. Sometimes Warren didn't recognize me from day to day. Sometimes Warren, a docile man before his injury, would verbally or physically attack one of his caregivers. Each of these conditions made for difficulty in reaching Warren where he was. Seeing, hearing, and valuing were each sequentially essential in finding Warren where he was. To refrain from adding angst in a situation where a man is verbally abusing his wife is quite difficult, but necessary nonetheless. Great care had to be taken to actually meet him and all of the people I ministered to where they were. Now, let me tell you the story of someone who lived a life above reproach and whose life and words still guide many over 100 years later. Therese was born in 1873 to devout Catholic parents. She was one of 5 girls, each committed herself to a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience as a nun. Therese lived a simple childhood, knowing from the age of 3 that she wanted to make these commitments. She balked at the idea of waiting until the typical age of 16 to commit herself. So at the young age of 15, she traveled from her home in Lisieux, France, to Rome and personally petitioned the Pope to allow her to enter into these commitments early. She was successful in committing herself early and lived a life of service and prayer until her, unfortunately, early death at the age of 24 from tuberculosis. A short 28 years after her death, Therese was canonized as a saint. Pope Pius X called her the greatest saint of modern times, and in 1997, Pope John Paul II proclaimed her a doctor of the church, putting her in rarefied air in the company of people like Aquinas and Augustine. I know what you're thinking. What made Therese so special? She was so young. Yes, you're right. In the last 3 years of her life, though, Therese wrote, on orders from a superior, a memoir about her life seeking God and service to his children. She spoke of the way of life she lived called the little way. See, hear, value. She spoke of how God had helped her come to practice little virtues and had shown her that love comprised all vocations and is everything. In the final section of her book, now known as The Journal of a Soul, Therese talked about the application of her sublime ideals, charitable thoughts towards others at all times. Seeking out the virtues and good intentions of others, and discontent with simply praying for her fellow nuns with whom she had disagreements and struggles. She insisted on seeking out their good virtues. These are the little ways Therese lived her life. In her book, she refers to herself as the little flower because she acknowledged that she was but a single small wildflower in a field of dazzling roses and lilies and other striking blossoms comprising the saints. She goes on to say that without the small violets and daisies, spring would not be so wonderful, and the vast meadows would lose their radiance. If you're thinking all of this flowery talk is great, and I'm sure Therese was a great person, that's all great. But what does that have to do with me? Well, allow me to bring this a little closer to home. Almost none of us will be saints, doctors of the church. Most of us will live quiet lives in little ways. Mowing someone's lawn, serving the homeless once or twice a month, contributing to a mission campaign, praying for, or sitting with a friend in grief. Serving your minister. These are the little ways we may all minister to others. Frontline, big-time service like that of ministers and chaplains simply isn't the call of the average Christian. Not all of us will be centerpiece arrangements of roses. Most of us will be simple wildflowers unseen by the majority, living and working in everyday careers in business, engineering, medicine, education. See, hear, value. Every career can be a tool in God's hand for the furthering of God's kingdom when we practice little ways of love. When I think of the people on this campus who have lived in a little but powerful way, one person jumps to the front of my mind. Lois Hill, the lunchtime swiper at the entrance of the cafeteria, known simply by many as Miss Lois. Lois is one of the sweetest people on campus. Usually when I walk by Lois, I try to say, have a good one, have a good one. And she sends back the compulsory, you have a gooder one, darling. I can't think of a better way, a better thing to do that shows a little way of love. So, where do we go from here? How do I live little? I recall Therese's words of bearing with others, being love, and thinking charitably of all others at all times. See, hear, value. These are the ways you can be a non-anxious presence in your everyday lives. Connecting with others is at the root of loving them. And loving them is the way to be a little flower in a big way. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed those first three talks, and I'm thinking about things that Madeline and Tanner said about having grace for yourself and grace for others that don't think like you think, or they're not like you, and that's the first time I've ever heard a meme quoted in a talk. So well played there. And then those three words of Tanner: see and hear and value. And I like the whole idea of the little way, because really, you guys, everything's done in small doses. A small actual act of love is always going to trump a gigantic idea that never gets played out. And so you want to make a big difference. Everybody wants to do something huge. I'm just saying little stuff it's where it's at. Like it's so doable. I don't have to wait for tomorrow or my degree or the next day or whatever. I can do it right now. And so I'm super challenged by the idea of intentionally seeking out virtues in people that I don't like. I kind of nurse my dislike of certain people, and it's hard to find the good. And so I'm really challenged. So I want you guys to do now, kind of in small groups for just like 10 minutes. This is all we're going to do. Now, if we can pull up that slide with the 3 questions on it, I want you to look at these, and we're going to chat this out. There we go. What one thought has impacted me so far? What challenged my typical point of view? And thirdly, is there one action that I can take as a result of what I've just heard? And so what you're doing is talking about it, and then you're being honest where you are and being accountable to the people that you share with. So I'll come back up and get us ready for the national feed here in just a moment. So let's take 10 minutes, just the people kind of sitting around. So I don't care informally how you form your groups, but these are the questions I want you to talk about based on what the first 3 speakers have said. Okay, well, thanks for taking a minute to talk about that, and I hope you enjoyed, like I said, the first 3 talks of the evening. Just really good stuff for us to think about, and now we want to take, kind of go back to the national feed here, and we're going to hear from Gabe Lyons as he introduces the next 2 speakers. I didn't tell you guys this, but Gabe has been to OC twice, and he made a friend with President DeSteiger and some of the rest of us. He's just really, really an interesting and really nice guy. He's written like really important books that have shaped my thinking a lot, especially a book called Unchristian and the Next Christians. As good as Unchristian was, the Next Christians just blew my mind about how much, you guys, that we as followers of Jesus need to set a better tone, like how we talk. We don't always have to be so angry about everything, and he's really, really done a great job with that in his books. And I have not yet read Good Faith, but I know that Dr. DeSteiger has read it. I know my father has read it, and some other people that I really look up to, and they say it may be even better than the first 2 books. And so when you hear Gabe Lyons talking to you here, this guy is super engaged, and he really knows what's going on. And so let's rejoin that national broadcast now, and he's going to introduce to you our next 2 speakers.
Welcome back. I hope you've had some lively conversations. Maybe you've mixed it up with a friend or 2, maybe challenged them. Maybe you purposely just tried to provoke them with something that you thought would get them going. But either way, we hope you're starting to have some engaging conversations that already you're seeing halfway through this night, how helpful it is to hear different perspectives, to be able to think together, to have space to do that. And so we're excited about our next talk because it continues down this vein where we're going to talk about something that I know affects all of us, and it's the idea of technology. Now, we can't get away from it. Technology is helping the world in ways that we never could have imagined. In the palm of our hands, as one expert talks about, we have 5,000 years of human innovation that just sits here at our fingertips. It's pretty amazing. But at the same point, we recognize that there can be some downsides to technology. How does it keep us maybe sometimes from engaging well one-to-one, or looking others in the eyes, or having the ability to relate to people, because it's so easy sometimes to isolate, to sit behind a screen, to engage with people or share our opinions in social media, but maybe not take the time that we really should to listen and to try to understand. For the next 9 minutes, we're going to get to engage this topic of technology, where we really consider, are we becoming addicted? Is it doing more harm than good in our lives, in our relationships? And to help us do that is Dr. Kara Powell. Kara is the co-author of a book called Growing Young, and also a book called Right Click that really deals with relationships and technology. But today she's here to help us think well about this, to help us consider, how is it affecting us? How can we develop a lens through which we start to think about our technology management in a way that helps us do more good and engage more personally with those who God's already put around us. So join me in welcoming Dr. Kara Powell.
Thanks so much, Gabe, for that great introduction. I'll tell you, you can't really know me without knowing my family. So I'm going to show you a picture of me and my husband and our 3 kids. Now, without us knowing it, our friend Adria, when she came over to take this Christmas photo, kept taking pictures when we weren't posing. So this next photo is our family more as we really are in our natural habitat. Now, I think if you look at my husband in the upper right-hand corner in one picture, okay, now let's look at him in the other picture. Yes, in the midst of our family's ups and downs, Dave stays stable. When I send out Christmas card photos, when I post pictures on social media, I choose the best ones. That helps me feel better. And if we ask, does technology help us feel better? The answer is yes. My devices help me accomplish 2 major goals. They help me be more connected with people, and they help me get more done. I have more relationships, and I'm more productive thanks to my digital media. And I bet the same is true with you. The danger, though, comes when we feel like we need technology in order to be okay. When technology becomes our lifeline, when it becomes an addiction we can't live without. So with my first goal of being more connected with people, honestly, sometimes technology interferes with the relationships I care about the most. My addictive devices often cause me to focus more on people I hardly ever see and who live thousands of miles away, and less on the friends, family, and colleagues I care about most, who are sitting just a few feet away. Researchers have found that the presence of a cell phone in a face-to-face conversation changes the conversation, even when it's face down. We stay shallow. It's not worth it to go deep if we think we're going to be interrupted by a text. That's why technology often leaves us with more friend requests and fewer true friends. We have more followers and fewer soulmates. With my second goal of being more productive, I'll tell you, I have never met a to-do list I didn't want to sprint through. But when I get addicted to my devices for a sense of accomplishment, I end up with more productivity and less personhood. My machines turn me into a machine who's racing through tasks instead of a human flourishing as God intends. Scientists are wondering if we need a new category of anxiety called nomophobia, as in no mobile phobia. Nomophobia affects us psychologically. It's that distracted, uneasy feeling we get when we can't find our phone. And it affects us biologically. Cell phone separation is correlated with increased heart rate and blood pressure. It's estimated that about 50% of us watching this right now could be diagnosed with nomophobia. Not too long ago, Justin Rosenstein picked up an iPhone, but he was worried about its addictive qualities. So he asked his assistant to install parent control features. He was especially concerned about uploading more apps, and especially the like button on Facebook. He found that particularly enslaving. And Justin should know, he's the Facebook engineer who designed the like button for Facebook. I'm a mom of teenagers who loves researching young people. And the great news is young people today are less sexually active, less likely to get pregnant, and partying less. But here's the bad news. They're also more prone to anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts and ideation. Why are some risk factors dropping while others are increasing? Because teenagers are less likely to be out getting into trouble with friends and more likely to be home alone, staring at their devices, seeing what their friends are doing without them. So those risk factors that generally depend on the presence of another person are down, but those we can do solo are up. Now, technology is not going away, but I think we need a new question that helps us recover from addiction and reclaim our devices, a new question that mirrors Jesus' words in Mark 12. In just a few sentences, Jesus trims hundreds of commands into one central great command. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. So instead of asking, does technology help us feel better, let's come up with a new question. Does technology help us love better? You see, technology becomes a problem when it interferes with the verb Jesus elevated above all others. It's a problem when it sabotages how we love. It's a problem when it becomes a substitute for relationship instead of a supplement for relationship. Does technology help us love better? I think it's a mixed bag, but for many of us, the needle tips more toward no than yes. Especially those of us who are susceptible to its addictive qualities, and especially when we think about the 3 strands of love woven together by Jesus. When it comes to loving God, technology has given us great apps so we can read the Bible wherever we want. But if we're honest, we hardly open those apps or pray. Time that we've theoretically carved to be with Jesus gets squeezed out by just one more email. Technology makes it harder for us to love ourselves. When we see posts and pictures of others' great lives, we're filled with anxiety and depression. And that's true whether we're a 17-year-old teenager, a 47-year-old soccer mom, or an 87-year-old widower. Time on Instagram and Snapchat usually fills us with self-loathing, not self-love. And when it comes to loving our neighbors, I love texts for showing that we care. But I would trade that in a second for a friend who shows up at my front door with my favorite coffee drink in hand. I love how FaceTime helps me stay close to my kids, but I would trade that in a heartbeat for a real live hug from one of them. For the last several years, we at the Fuller Youth Institute have been studying churches doing amazing work with teenagers and young adults. In the midst of so many churches aging and shrinking, we have hunted down churches that are growing and growing young. Before we visited one church growing young in Pennsylvania, we talked to the teenagers and young adults there, and we asked them, what do you love the most about your church? And 15-year-olds talked about how this man named Bill would show up at their basketball games and cheer them on. And 25-year-olds talked about how this same Bill would come to their workplace and take them out for coffee. As a research team, we thought, we have got to meet Bill. It turns out Bill is 76 years old. And Bill remembers an adolescence where no one was in the stands cheering him on. No one was showing up for his major life events. So he has made a vow that that's not going to happen to the young people at his church. He's even written a passionate manifesto to recruit other adults to join the cause. Now, this church uses technology. They're on Facebook, Twitter. They have a website to connect the generations. But that's not what people rave about. People rave about Bill. Now, truth be told, Bill does use a little bit of technology. When we asked him to send us his passionate manifesto that he'd written, he used technology to do it. He faxed it to us from the local public library. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should use more or less technology. Instead, I want to give you new criteria so you can make that decision yourself. How about you make love the test? If you're wondering at any given moment, should you pick up a device, how about you ask, what's the most loving step I could take right now? When you're at a meeting with colleagues and you're tempted to pick up your tablet and send an email to a colleague who's not there, should you do that or not? How about you make love the test? When you're inclined to comment on a post or a picture that's controversial and you know that your comment will spark a great debate, is that a good thing to do? I don't know. How about you make love the test? When you're out with friends having a fabulous time, should you take and post a bunch of pictures which will make those who weren't invited feel left out? How about you make love the test? When you're home on a Friday or Saturday night with nothing to do and you're inclined to go online and see what everybody else is up to, should you? How about you make love the test? Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. If we who are followers of Jesus made love our test for how we use technology for just one day, I think our world would be different. And if we could string together a series of days where we made love the test for how we use technology, I'm pretty sure there would be a revolution. Thank you.
What a practical and great talk for us to hear as we get into our second hour here at Q Commons. I think as we think about technology, as we consider how it works and operates in our own lives, this is going to be a great test. To put it through a filter that's not just a bunch of rules or contracts, but really puts it into the human perspective of how we should think and process how we're going to engage. Now, as we continue forward tonight for our final talk at the global level, before we go back to you, I'm excited for this closing talk at this level because part of the challenges I know in healing a divided nation is truly understanding how do we get past all the division? How do we get through kind of this malaise of seeing people who think differently than us, have very different perspectives, maybe are quite opinionated about those perspectives and not ashamed to share them? How is it that we can move forward in that kind of situation? Because I know for some of us the answer is to just be quiet. It's to just kind of quiet down, not to speak up. But our next presenter is going to help us understand how all of the differences and distinctiveness that we see in human nature, we see in the way God's created all of us in His image, actually gives us an opportunity. Now, we called the title of this talk Our Complicated Moment because I think for most of us, we're feeling like, man, this is getting a bit complicated. I'm not sure how to respond. I'm trying to figure out how to respond just to my family. I don't know how to go outside of that. And he's going to challenge us as he always done. His name is Propaganda. And Propaganda is somebody who just has an amazing history. He grew up as a young child in an ethnically Mexican neighborhood in the Los Angeles area where he was the only black kid kind of running around. And then he moves out to the suburbs. And now as a family in the suburbs, mostly a white suburb, he's known as part of the family that's the poor black family. And so in that kind of circumstance, growing up in that kind of life where he always felt different, always felt a bit out of place, never felt necessarily connected or that he knew who his community was, where people looked different than him. God was even in those moments shaping him to start to see the world the way God sees it. But in addition to that history, he started to do amazing work as an artist. He's a prophet. I mean, this guy gives prophetic words in the art that he creates and produces. He creates albums that I want you to buy. There's an album called Crooked that just released that I think all of us should be downloading, we should be listening to, because it's not just music that entertains you. It does that, but it also challenges you. It speaks deep to your heart. And so I'm so excited for him to just be with us to share for a few moments his thoughts on how we collectively can engage our complicated moments. So join me in welcoming Propaganda.
Yeah. So let's dive right in. So an American Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Ginsburg, she, in a recent interview, said an interesting statement. She said how this true symbol of the United States is not the bald eagle, but the pendulum, right? And when a pendulum swings too far in one direction, it'll come back, and terrible things have often happened in the United States. But once we can hope that we can learn from those bad things. And I think that speaks so profoundly, not only to how a nation as a collective shapes its identity, but also as a person, as an individual, shapes its identity. The truth is we don't exist in these pendulums. The truth is we don't exist in those silos. Our identities are so much more complicated than that. I want to talk to you about those complications and to try to hammer this thing home, bring up a couple things. One, last year, an American hip-hop artist, his name's Kendrick Lamar, he's one of my favorite artists, released his fourth studio album. And he found himself, in the content of that album, having an interesting subtext, an interesting sub-conversation, and found himself having things in common with some unlikely people in unlikely situations. The least of these are the elections of our president, the election in France, and the election in Germany. These were very similar things that was going on there. And how does that work? What does Kendrick Lamar and Donald Trump have in common? Well, it's complicated. I want to talk to you about this concept called intersectionality, and it was first coined out of this study of critical race theory from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw at UCLA. And what it is, I'm going to try to give you the exact definition. And what it is the study of how overlapping and intersectional social identities, particularly with minority identities, relate to the systems, structures, oppression, and domination and discrimination. How our identities, as complex as they are, relate to power. Let me give you an example. In case you haven't noticed, I'm black. But I'm also an American. And I'm also a father. I'm also a husband. I got 2 daughters. Pray for me. And I am also the son of a woman, a black woman, right, who got her rights in the 60s, but probably should have got her right during the women's suffrage movement 100 years before that, right? When you don't recognize how our complexities work, because the women's suffrage movement wasn't about women's rights, that was about white women's rights, right? Because if it was about women's rights, when you fast forward to the Women's March that happened our last November, there was some problems with that, because it's interesting, you so concerned about women's problems, but you sure wasn't concerned about the mothers of refugees who were watching their children wash up to the shore. You sure wasn't concerned about mothers watching their sons being shot in the streets. You sure not concerned about mothers in Puerto Rico right now who still don't have power. You sure not concerned about mothers who can't feed their children in Somalia. When you don't recognize our overlap, a lot of things can go wrong. Now, let's go back to this Kendrick Lamar thing. What he did in this album, he introduced a concept of how black people have often structured their identity. And we've known about this in the fringe. It's sort of a black American community religion. He introduced this idea called the Black Hebrew Israelites, which basically the concept is that black people, Native Americans, and indigenous Latinos are the true children of Israel. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of things that we might find problematic with that, because you kind of have to understand how pre-Columbian America worked. So when you differentiate between a Native American and a Mesoamerican, you're kind of talking about the same person, because the border was drawn by the colonizer, right? And it also means that you kind of don't understand the transatlantic slave trade. We're the same people, right? But he introduced that concept to us. Now, what does that have to do with the last few presidential elections? Well, the platform that our president walked out on was a platform of nationalism, but a specific type of nationalism, a populist votes that's kind of more about nativism. And a nativism that understands that above the idea of where your passport is from, it's more about where your identity's narrative starts, right? So if you start as a native, then somehow or another your identity is more important than somebody else's identity, right? And what happened with that, what we saw in our states, was that was somewhat of a dog whistle for some of our fringe population who kind of saw that and said, hey, you know what? You're right. We understand the subtext of that. Either we're a nation or we're not a nation. Either we take care of them or we take care of us. And then the subtext of that, the us or the or is white, right? Is the structure of what we mean by when we say white. Now, the problem with what they think white is, I don't think they understand their own nation's heritage, because truthfully, all of white wasn't welcomed here, right? It was a very small part, it's a very tiny part of one island in Europe that was considered American. They didn't even want the Irish here, for crying out loud. That's the northern part of the same island, right? So I think you kind of don't understand what you mean when you say white. So when we don't understand our overlap, we don't understand the complexity of our identities, a lot of things can go wrong and we swing to these pendulums. So the question is, how do we avoid these pendulums? How do we understand what intersectionality can do to move us to something called an ally? How do we move from intersectional to ally? Well, one of the things we have to understand is that I am not only, as a black man, crushed by structures of injustice, I'm also indicted by them. What do I mean by that? When I look at the undocumented in our states, I have to understand that at one time I was undocumented too, especially if I'm a person of faith. I was once undocumented, and someone stepped in my place, right? I need to understand that as we're going through this this complete revolution, this complete revealing of all kinds of sort of sexual abuses where men in power were using their power to overpower a lot of our sisters in the workplace. We're seeing all that happen. I have to understand, as much as I think that that's terrible, as much as I still sit under the same systems of oppression, as a male, I also benefit from them. It's intersectional. So how do I move from that knowledge to being an ally? One of those things I have to understand is that, first of all, I am not the sole purveyor of suffering. I have to understand that my suffering is connected to Ethiopia. It's connected to Somalia. I have to say, as much as I want to give to this organization, maybe I had a hand in my flourishing in causing the instability in that place. Maybe I had something to do with that. I need to understand that when I understand that your cause and my cause are not in competition with each other. While you are working on ending sex trafficking, while I am working on systemic racism, if we understand that we're still dealing with the same structure, then me and you can be allies, and I can see my life in your life. And then lastly, I think I need to understand that unity is not uniform. That we're not called to sameness. We're called to oneness. And that me and you share a narrative. Me and you share a story. And how me and you may relate to systems of structure, maybe in not the very same exact way, but there's some overlap. And when I recognize my overlap, when I recognize the amount of identity we actually share, then I think we move from extreme to intersectional to ally. So who am I? Who are you? Well, I know you're much more complicated than the political parties you may exist in. I know you're much more complicated than the neighborhoods you come from. I know you're much more complicated than a box. Who are you? Well, it's complicated.
What a great and fitting way to conclude our national broadcast of Q Union. We are so excited that Prop's with us because he always causes us to think. He stirs us up. He kind of pushes some buttons, and he does it on purpose because he wants us to not just settle for the superficial ways in which we sometimes see one another, but to dig deep into our history and to how we're contributing to good or to problems and to just have a higher awareness. And so we're so thankful for him. In addition to that, I asked Prop if he would do something special just for you guys. For our college students who are part of Q Union, we want to give you something from him that you might not always be able to get. In fact, you can't get it anywhere else. He's been working on a spoken word performance, something that he's never done before, something he's never done for an audience, something we just talked through in the last couple of days. And I said, hey, for our Q Union students, for everybody participating tonight, would you do something that just they could have, that we don't show to anybody else, just for them? And he said yes. And so we have that. He also took a few moments. I said, what would you say to a college student right now? Like, what are the 3 things that you wish every college student knew? And so he did that as well. So you're going to hear from him on that. And then the final thing is we're going to give you one of his songs. So all you need to do is text us, and we're going to send this to you. So just text, look at the number on your screen, and text the word union. And when you do that, we'll send you the links, send you the information so that you can actually have access to some of Prop's additional comments that he has just for you, as well as his music. Well, as we move forward tonight, one of the questions is, how do we take action after this event? Because the event's a good thing, right? We get together, we're hearing these talks, we're inspired, we're thinking in new ways, we're challenged by it, but at the end of the day, if it's just ideas and we're not moving with these ideas, then sometimes that can fall flat, and we don't want that to happen. So for you, we want you to take responsibility for the way that you can contribute to being part of the healing that we need on our campuses, amongst our relationships, as we think about our futures, as we think about the work that we want to do one day or we feel called to. And so as you work towards that, I want to show you this little video that for us at Q is the way we want you at Q Union to be thinking about the next month and how we're going to lead forward. So let's listen to this. So we're introducing tonight the opportunity for us to take responsibility, realizing that if things are going to change, it's not going to come from just politics or from our national leaders. It's not going to come even from your campus leaders. It's not going to come from trusting media to make the change that's needed in our society. It's going to come from each of us, and it's up to us. And so we're asking you to take this challenge. We want you to think about over the next 30 days how you can be a part of this. And we're doing this nationwide. We're asking people to do 3 things. The first is to speak up, to let your voice be known, to be compassionate, but also civil, and to listen and learn from one another. But to let people know that you're going to be leading in a different way. You're not going to be part of the division. You're going to be part of the reconciliation. The second thing we're asking you to do is to meet up. Now, I know on your campus this probably isn't too difficult. You're seeing people all the time. Person in your mind right now that maybe you had a disagreement with lately on some idea, some philosophy that they have that you don't. Maybe it's a debate around theology. Maybe it's a debate around our culture or a current issue. Maybe it's a debate about something that you just heard tonight. And I want you to reach out to them. Use your phone, text them, say, I want to meet up with you. We're not only going to speak up, we're going to meet up. We're going to grab coffee together or go get it for a few minutes where we can just talk, where I can learn and listen to you. And take that first step, initiate, and say, I want to hear from you, your perspective. I want to understand more. I don't want to just label you and set you aside. I actually want to know more. So figure out who that might be that you should meet up with in the next couple of weeks. And then the third thing we're asking you to do is to listen up. Now this can be when you're dining together at a restaurant, or maybe it's right there on campus. Or maybe it's when you go home for Thanksgiving. Like, what would it look like for you to say, I want to ask better conversations so I can understand why people think differently than me? You see, ultimately, it's not about all of us thinking the same way. It's not about groupthink. It's not about us just being unified in the same way of approaching every single issue. It's much more about respecting those who are different. And so part of how we protect our ability to speak up, to have our first freedoms, to be able to speak to issues that we're going to care about, is that we actually develop the skill of listening. And so we're asking you to be a part of this, to be a part of Up to Us. You can go to uptousnow.com to get all of the information, to get a couple downloads that we've provided for you that'll help you do this and take you on this journey. But also use the hashtag #UpToUs and use it actually when you see somebody doing an act of kindness, or you see something online where you go, man, this is distinct. These are 2 people being kind to one another, helping one another. Let's put that hashtag #UpToUs on it, and let's start to see how we together are leading a better conversation and being part of the solution. Well, as you head back for your final talk, I hope you've had a wonderful time with us. I wish I could be in the room with you to hear this next talk, to hear the discussion that will ensue. But just know at Q, we care about your learning. We care about you understanding the world that you're engaging and this culture and how to do that faithfully. You can continue to stay in touch with us through qideas.org. Weekly, we have a podcast. There's so many resources there that are free and available for you to utilize. We hope you will. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Have a great night.
All right, so here we are coming down to the end, and I'm really excited to introduce to you Racquelle Idlebird. Racquelle is a junior biology major from the Dallas area, and if you spent any time around her, she is astute and thoughtful and articulate, and she's just carries herself with such class and composure. She's very kind. I think she bridges groups very well, like maybe one of the best on campus. Every group she comes to, I feel like she can really fit in there, and she just treats all of us with such respect. And so I'm really looking forward to what she has to share with us. So Racquelle Idlebird.
Hi, y'all. So I have a confession to make. I learned something about myself this semester. I'm not the best at paying attention to my friends, and sometimes I lie. You know the routine. You see your friend, and automatically you ask, how are you? Somebody's response should be good, and then you just go about your day. But one day in particular, I asked my friend how he was doing, and he said not good, but I heard I'm good. I wasn't listening. How many times have you done this? Are your confessions the same as mine? Dig deep and ask yourself, Do I really pay attention to the people around me? Every day, we readily project our assumptions on one another and onto ourselves without truly and faithfully listening. Now, I want you to think of your favorite song. Jam to it, feel it. I see, okay. Day by day, we go on playing our own soundtrack, hoping that it doesn't hop, skip, or crack, because God forbid something interrupt my song while I'm trying to listen to it. We should welcome these interruptions, though, because it's in these moments that reality song comes into play. And it's definitely not as lit as we may think. Reality song is raw. It's uncomfortable. It evokes emotions within us that we probably didn't even know we had. It's like our lives are being protected by virtual earplugs that allow us to block out things that may challenge our own and familiar way of life. Dealing with mainly the social and cultural aspects, tonight I dare you to throw away any and everything that may restrain you from truly experiencing the sounds of this world. Take the barriers down and allow your heart and mind to open. What happened to true conversation? What happened to using prolific words to persuade anger away, to hoist up our beliefs in our morals, and to draw the line? What if instead of checking our TLs for the 39th time today, or binging on whatever trash TV show that pops into our heads, I see, or talking and texting with somebody that we know definitely won't positively contribute to our life in any way, we talk. We take time out to meet with someone who normally wouldn't get our attention, a person we can learn from, a person that needs the talk just as much as we do. So another thing about me, and y'all are getting a high dose of Racquelle, I'm being very real, and it's probably really bad, is that I'm a big debater. I am probably the most stubborn person that you'll meet, and I'm somewhat feisty on the side. Once my mind is set, it is very hard for me to change because I have studied, and of course, my way is the best way. I found myself in conversations with my friends, and whenever I would disagree, I would respond, they would then respond, and then I would kill them with my impressive comeback that I've been waiting to use for 2 whole minutes. Because we have such good conversations, this went on from subject to subject, and eventually, in my mind, I'd be declared the winner. On my way back to my throne with a smug smile, I would ponder over the matter. I knew exactly what I had said, but I could only give tiny bullet points of what they were trying to convey. We need to always make sure that we are not just being quiet, waiting for our turn, but listening to understand. It's in moments like these where taking a stand and listening is so crucial. When you're around people that you're comfortable with, things get real. Cherish this. These talks can make a difference. I'm not saying that everything that gets said is of equal value. What I am saying, though, is every person is of equal value. Knowing how to separate the two is where discernment comes into play. Many times I find myself saying I'm good when I know it's a lie. I'm not good. Despite being stressed about my classes or my lively bad hair day under a Nike cap, I lay awake crying the night before, worried and afraid. Afraid for my family, afraid for your family. After seeing on TV that another teenage black student had been shot, I immediately was in panic. Was it someone I knew? Was it someone you knew? My brother, my father, my uncle. A boy's life was over because someone decided to act rashly instead of listening. It's like our country has been infected. Our society, though it has its high points, is living in the aftermath of unresolved hatred, injustice, pain, and definite abuse of power. The wounds of our past have neither been properly treated nor completely healed. I don't have to tell you that a wound not properly treated can lead to infection. Within this infection, it eventually spreads into the rest of the body. Eventually, the whole body suffers. The body will then start to shut down and ultimately fail. What started out as a minuscule cut and problem then turns into something deadly, and it could have been avoided had we paid attention. For centuries, it seems we have been on this repetitive loop, a power struggle, oppression, a fight, a change, and then repeat. For a long time, we have seen the problem and ignored it. It's been happening, but now is the time we can really talk about it and do something about it. Maybe you haven't been treated unfairly because of the color of your skin, but that is the reality for some people in this country. Let me ask you something. Have you taken the time out to pray for those who do not look like you, who are not offered the same opportunity as you are? What if you did? Wouldn't that change things for them and for you? You guys, I know that's heavy. I really want you to like me. I really do. So this is really hard to talk about. But have you ever been racially profiled by a police officer? Have you ever lay awake wondering, nervous about whether or not your brother, who's 6'3", a black man, might not come home because of a misunderstanding? I'm just asking for a friend. What if we agree that listening to each other's life experiences was 100% a good thing? Wouldn't we all be better for it? Maybe you can find a situation in your life where you can relate to what I'm saying. That's empathy, and that's the magic word. It's the ability to place ourselves in the shoes of another without being afraid they may fit a little too snug or rub our ankles a little too raw. Empathy is when we refuse to allow someone to tell us that we can't all seek to understand and appreciate each other. I say that tonight, starting with me. We choose to open our eyes and open our ears and let change begin with us. To change means first to listen. A lot of times we opt out of change because of what it requires. Change brings discomfort. So I have this sign in my kitchen, on my kitchen counter, and it says, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." It stares at me every time I leave my apartment. I'm not even sure I've even always believed this statement. Sure, I can bring change within myself, but I'm just one person. Yes, and that is the key. It starts with you. Even with this topic, it takes someone from the majority to stand up and say, enough is enough, and mean it. If every one of us after tonight were to go home and really think about where our pros and cons are as people, it will be enough. Dare to face the imperfections in this life. I'll do it too. Allow yourself to experience the thoughts and frustrations of other humans. God listens to us, and He hears us. I want to end with the beginning of a poem by David Ignatow entitled "Listen." Standing beside you, I took an oath to make your life simpler by complicating mine. And what I always thought would happen did. I was lifted up in joy. Thank you.
Well, that was a mic drop right there. That's super good, you guys. Thank you for coming. We're not leaving before you chat for just a few minutes, but that's a lot to take in. And I just want you to know the fact that you would come tonight and listen to this tells me a lot about who you are and what you care about. If some of you are interested in the days ahead to maybe form a group that would meet in a regular place on a regular time and talk about these kinds of things, about how to raise a level of dialogue and listening, starting with us, just one small voice, one small group, one smaller university at a time, then somebody get on that and do it. Like, you're empowered around here to do it. And so I want to encourage you in that way. So let's have those 3 questions pop up again. I'm going to give you just a few minutes. It's 8:49. I told you we'd be out of here at 9 o'clock, and we will be. And I'm going to give you like 8-9 minutes to talk about these 3 questions. Then I'm going to come back and finish us with a prayer. So let's see those 3 questions. What one thought impacted me in these last 3 talks that you heard? What challenged my typical point of view? There's plenty of that, wasn't there? And then, is there one action I can take as a result of what I just heard? Well, thanks again, guys, for coming, and thanks for engaging the conversation. I look forward to you talking to me on the sidewalk, dropping by the office, hanging out in the brew. Let's keep talking. My 2 favorite things in life are great laughs and really deep talks. Like, the extremes of it, I just love it. So if you need to have a good laugh, then come make me laugh. And if you want to have a good talk, then let's talk. And let's not be the only ones that do it. Let's kind of make that the culture of this place, starting with just us, just one at a time. Thanks for coming. Let me pray. Father God, we just commit this into your hands, Lord, and I'm inspired and encouraged, and I'm hopeful, and yet, like was said tonight, we know that it's not just like, it doesn't just happen overnight. Help us to let go of these manicured ideas of perfect pictures and amazing events and experiences and perfectly crafted social media tweets and all that stuff, Lord, and just to let go of that and just kind of be in that raw moment like Racquelle talked about, and just experience life together and just to be honest and real, and help us, Lord. Not all of us who call on you, Jesus, as our Savior, not all of us who wear your name reflect you well. And me at the top of that list, Lord, sometimes I just get it wrong. And I pray, Lord, that you would take away anger and bitterness and unforgiveness. God, help us not to be competitive with one another in areas that don't matter. And really, Lord, help us to not be competitive when it comes to following you. You rise above it all. And may your name be held high at this university that carries your name. God, go with us now in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thanks for coming, guys.